Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Organizations, where Rupert and I talk about our passion topic, which is org design and weather. And we also have a lot of fun with our new guests each episode. So, Rupert, how are you doing today?
I'm, as always, living the dream and
Amazing.
enjoying what remains to be stunning British weather. Although, rained last night and then sun's out in glory. So we were worried about the garden and
Oh,
growing up in New Zealand, growing up on a farm, you always worry about the weather and drought. So if you ever
yes,
speak to
not
a
enough
farmer,
rain. Yeah.
all you get is an unhappy person because the weather's never right.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
We have two guests. We have, for the first time,
Yes.
let's be bold, two for the price of one. So let's see how that goes. So Jodie Goulden and Richard Lucas from Orgdesign Works, which is a global firm, and we'll get into that. So great to have you both. Thank you for coming.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be
Welcome,
here.
and thanks for joining us. Yes.
And Richard, we'll go against convention. So normally it's ladies first, but we won't fall into that trap. It'd be nice to start with you and just a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into org design, and then we can shift seamlessly over to Jodie.
Sure, there is another maxim which is age before beauty as well, which is so I will take that. I'll take that privilege. In fact,
Love that.
the universe is trying to tell me something because I turned 61 this month, or last month rather, and I became a grandfather for the second time. So I sort of look back at my career, and it's quite a long one. I will try and keep it short in terms of introduction here, but I'm very keen to carry on doing this for as long as people think it's valuable for me to do so. So I shall be in and around the world of org design for many years to come. I guess how I got into organization design really starts with my early career in HR, which was in the car industry, and doing everything to do with HR and recruitment and training and employee administration and employee relations and all of the things that HR people get involved with. But it was when I was given the opportunity to lead the people stream or the people element of the setup of a new engine and gearbox plant or factory for the automotive company I was working for, and that involved everything from setting the structure and understanding the senior roles and how that flowed down through the organization, the workforce plan, the skills plan, ways of working, and how the organization would work differently from the way it had done traditionally. And that was a real eye opener for me, because what it did was it moved my kind of thoughts around the work I did away from the transactional and the tactical and almost the individual onto the organizational and the strategic and the systemic, because we were talking about a whole function, a whole operation. And I could see all of the facets of the organization coming together and being with the organization design component being a fundamental part of that. So that was really, I suppose, when I was really quite early in my career, that's where I started. And when I looked then at where I was going to go next in HR, that wasn't available to me, because it was going back into the tactical and the transactional. So I didn't want to do that, right? So I suppose I'd extracted the best part of HR and then moved that forward in my career. So I then worked in. I was head of HR for an automotive supplier for a while as well, but I moved on in my career into consulting and did a lot of broad organizational change programs, change management and communications, and the organizational component of big change. I worked for PwC for a couple of years, a couple of spells actually, quite a long period in two lots, and latterly in a senior role in the UK organization. But I decided that after being a sort of a slave to consulting in larger and indeed smaller firms, that I would do something on my own. So I did. Around 2017, I went independent, and in 2019, Jodie and I met, and we decided to work together in 2020, and I joined her And we've been working together ever since, which has been fantastic and thoroughly enjoyable. I suppose it wasn't really until maybe 2008 when I rejoined PwC for the second time, if you like, when there was an awful lot of demand for the kind of work that I'd been doing in that early part of my career with whole system change. And that's when I really started to understand that the work I was doing was organization design. And now that's exactly what I do. So that's exactly what we do. So it's taken a long time to crystallize it into these are the words that we use to describe the work we do. But that's my kind of history, I suppose. Just a little bit about me. I'm an absolute mad cricket fan, and I'm a wine enthusiast as well. And I took my wine qualifications a few years ago, so I have interesting conversations with sommeliers. There we go.
Great.
Very
I look forward to
cool.
having a glass with you one day, Richard.
Absolutely, we should.
And Jodie, how did you meet Richard? And
Yeah,
that's an intriguing story. That must have been sort of love at first sight almost. And then
almost, yeah. Let me share a bit of the story up until the time that Richard and I started working together as Orgdesign Works and how I got to that point. So I spent a bit more than 20 years working in multinational companies. And honestly, I loved that. I got to have a very global career. I have had, I started in Australia and then I moved to Canada and then Germany and the UK. I spent quite a bit of time living and working in Asia Pacific, in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Singapore before moving back to Germany. And now I'm based in the US. And so during that time, every few years, I got offered a new role, which was, super challenging and exciting. And I didn't really have a career plan at that time. I just kept saying yes to the next adventure kind of thing and see what happens. I was working in HR, and I probably did just about every HR role that you can do. But what really stuck with me since working in big companies is my role as a leader. So, at times I had, more than 50 people reporting to me across 7 or 8 different countries. Or I was in the global headquarters steering projects across the world, or I was part of a leadership team kind of shaping the future business. And that gave me a really good, understanding of how organizations work or don't work. And so that's something I lean on very heavily still now as a consultant. But at some point during that career, I looked back on, the amazing 20 years that I'd had, and I thought, what's going to keep that challenging and exciting for the next 10 or 20 years? And I just couldn't picture it. I couldn't figure out how things could stay that interesting. So I had a really strong feeling I needed to jump off the ship kind of thing. And so I quit my big corporate job. I didn't really have a plan, but I did give myself some time and space to reflect. And I discovered a few things. One is that I really believe that big companies have an important role to play in making the world a better place. And actually, I still love working with them. I think that's because, I really know that companies are full of amazing and talented people who are super motivated to have an impact. At the same time, sometimes they're held back by the way that the organization is designed. And that's the other part of my reflection, which was, well, my way of contributing to that is about org design. And how did I come to that conclusion was kind of just looking at what have been the highlights in the work that I've done. And it turns out that those things that I worked on, where I felt like I was good at it and I loved it, was org design. And I'm sure, we've all probably said this or heard this many times. We didn't really call it org design. I never thought to myself, well, I'm working on an org design project. But if I look at those things like for example, working on the merger integration of two companies that have very different cultures and structures and processes, and then putting those things together and trying to figure out how do we make, ultimately the end result be more than the sum of those parts? How do we fit that puzzle together? That's an org design project. Or being part of a team that is working on an underperforming business unit and getting really clear on the future direction and defining what do we want to focus on, and then how do we bring the people into the right roles to get that done, and then seeing that business unit become the star performer of the company. That's an org design project, right? So that's what made me decide to be an independent consultant in organization design. That's when I set up Orgdesign Works, and I was in Germany. I was living in Germany at that time. And I went out to look for where are the people doing this kind of work, and stumbled across the European Organization Design Forum, which is, as you've heard, where Richard and I met. And soon after that, Richard joined me in establishing Orgdesign Works. In the meantime, I moved to the US. And so that puts us in, I think, a really good position to be able to support global clients. So that's an area that that we are able to do in the org design area.
Yeah. Clearly, you both work as a strong team and now covers the entire globe with your geographies itself. I think there's a great complementary skills that you both bring onto the table. But before we get into that how do you engage with your clients and how do you do the team around it? I have a quick question. Uh, as we think about the org design, like both of you mentioned that org design was not even org design when you did the work, right? Like you were doing the work, you were creating a systems thinking and connecting the dots, creating the impact, but it's not called org design. So when you are being called by your clients, do they actually raise their hand to say that I have an org design problem, come solve it? Or how do you actually get that intake from the clients? I'm just curious, like your organization is Orgdesign Works. Are there clients who are saying, "Oh, I don't have an org design problem, so I should not be reaching out to them," but they do have the org design problem because as an org design practitioner, we know what's going on. So how do you deal with that part?
Yep. It's interesting because that's a great, really good question. And the answer is that sometimes people look at the name that we call ourselves and think that is not what we want. But when we have an opportunity to explain to people what we do, then I think people then, okay, so actually you're going to help us solve the problem that we want to solve, which is, how do we build capability within our organization? How do we grow? How do we double in size over the next 2 years? How do we take 30% of our cost out? So those are real problems that we help to solve. I think if you've been if you've been in and around the organization design communities for long enough, or the organization development communities for long enough, you'll know there's this constant back and forth around, well, you defining something as org development or org design or whatever it is. And I think we know what we believe organization design is, and that and we'll come on, I think, a little bit later to talk about some of the principles that underpin our practice. But we see similarities and overlaps with communities in organization development, in talent, in HR, in business transformation, in any other label that you might put on. So I think we don't tend to worry too much about that. I think when people understand the broad lens that we look at organization design through, then they tend to understand that we can help them with their issue.
Yeah. I think that as well. I love that you noticed that, Shradha. It was actually a very deliberate decision to name Orgdesign Works with Org Design, and I don't know if that was right or wrong, but it felt like there was an increasing demand for that kind of work, and least I always wanted to be very clear about the kind of work that we were doing. So we found that sometimes it's a conversation starter because people will say, Orgdesign Works, what is that? And so you get to talk about it that way. And then, as Richard has said, we try and communicate very much in the sense of putting ourselves in the shoes of a leader in a company and saying, well, if these are the kind of things you're experiencing, like you want to get things done, but bureaucracy is getting in your way, or you really need to move forward, but you're not sure which areas to focus on, or those kind of practical day-to-day symptoms that people have, and then that's where we can say that we can help.
We have had conversations with prospective clients who come to us thinking that where they have maybe a structure problem, or they believe that they have a structure problem, and the question is, how can you help me solve my structure problem, or indeed, how can you help me implement this new structure that I have created? And obviously that leads to a whole series of questions that we would have around alignment with strategy. What are you trying to achieve? What's the outcome that you're looking for? Is this what is this a response to? What is it in service of? And when you enter that discussion, it goes one of two ways. And especially when we talk about the way in which we would help them, which is wide and deep engagement. It's testing and iteration. It's a an engaged and perhaps longer process than they might have thought about. Sometimes they drop off and they say, well, no, actually that's not what we want. That's it almost scares
We
them.
have the answer. So
yeah, it scares
your
them to think that they might
diagnosis
right.
approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in many cases, and in most cases, I have to say, they go, okay. I didn't realize that it was going to be as involved and as involved as that, and as so. But you've opened my eyes to that.
So with that, and we were talking before we went on about traps, and we thought we'd do something slightly different in this two of you and move traps forward in our agenda. And you really, hinting to a trap there, which is people have the structure defined in their head, and you go in and just willy-nilly just implementing that is a trap because it's just without understanding. So maybe double click on that, but also just other traps that you think are just very common that people should be avoiding.
There's sort of two very linked traps here that I would talk about. Firstly, starting with structure, and then once you start to unpack why we had one client in about 3 or 4 years ago who came to us with just that thought that said, I need to reduce the number of direct reports. I do need to restructure my organization behind a new strategy that's emerging. And here's the structure that I think we need to put in place. And as soon as we started unpicking the strategy, then it became evident that actually this could be nothing more than a hypothesis to hold and test, but actually the end result might be 30-40% different. And actually, having that particular leader understand that their hypothesis wasn't invalid. It was probably more than valid, but needed to be tested. And I think it sort of linked to a real trap that we see a lot, which is trying to accelerate the design process too fast, going too fast, and often starting with structure is a way of doing that. We think pretty much there's there are some fundamental principles here. One is that we believe that time to implement is the key measure of success, not time to design. So that's if your design process takes 3 months, right, you may never implement. If your design process takes 6 to 9 months, you may implement in 3 months. And so by the end of 12 months, you're starting to put a new operating model in place, a new organization in place. You're starting to get some benefit. And we have real examples. I certainly in my career, real examples where people have tried to accelerate that design process down to a matter of weeks. What happens is that the design becomes closed in a very closed group of people, and and it's not tested. It's not tested by the people who are going to operate it, because your design will be tested in your organization at some point, and you really want to be testing it under control conditions, not when you launch it into the organization and everybody goes, well, this isn't going to work because XYZ. Well, if you'd known that during your design phase, then you wouldn't have implemented it like that, or you wouldn't have designed it like that. And so to counter that, in our view, there's three things that we call accelerators, and they are accelerators, but they're accelerators of implementation, not of design. And they actually cause you to take longer in design. One is strategic clarity. The second one is wide and deep engagement, and the third one is testing and iterating. Those three things will accelerate your implementation. And if you build that into your design process, then you have much more chance of success. So, yeah, that's kind of, for me, that's the sort of conversation that we try and have with clients who are sort of very keen, and understandably, in many cases, very keen to get things moving, because they've either got board level pressure, or shareholder pressure, or pressure from the city to announce something, or they've got a budget round coming up in 3 months' time, 4 months' time, and they need some understanding of what their organization
artificial reasons in
Yeah.
many ways. And so we unpack those three. The first one, my experience is most organizations, when I go in and you ask for their strategy, don't have one. They'd have a list of goals and aspirations and dreams, but not a clear differentiated strategy. So is that what you're finding as well? You go in and people have, like, to the point, here's my structure, but what's the strategy? And are you finding that people just very often haven't articulated that effectively so that you can actually design? Is Jodie, maybe
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we do find it not always. It's great to jump into a conversation and then someone says, yes, here's the strategy, and they pull out something that's really interesting and differentiated.
It does happen. It does happen.
But actually, I agree. I'd say the majority of the time, it's either not there at all, or everyone says there's a strategy, but it doesn't appear. No one can articulate it, and no one can bring out the piece of paper that it's written on. So we do find ourselves doing a lot of work that's connected with getting that clarity, which I feel like is really important anyway.
Yeah. We tend to talk about us not being strategy consultants, but we need to know what the strategy is before we can start fiddling around with the organization, because if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter what you do. Your organization is perfectly designed for the results you're getting today, and if you need different results and different outcomes tomorrow, then you need to probably reconfigure your organization in some way. Yeah, I mean, lots of examples of having. In fact, I mean, the response that we find helpful is actually to help people think about assumptions. So what assumptions? So if you haven't got a written down strategy, well, what assumptions are you making about where you're competing and how you're competing and which markets? Let's start to make some assumptions, and then we can say, well, and let's look at some options around your organization that might meet those assumptions. And in the middle there, you've got capabilities and so on. But we could go on forever talking about this. But that's a good start point. And we absolutely do not advise clients on their strategy. That's entirely up to them, whether they make washing machines in China, or whether they make cars in Brazil, or whether they want to become the next Netflix. We don't care particularly. What we do care about is that they know it, and then we're able to then derive from that.
So, in the majority of cases where it's not articulated and not known, and people maybe are making different assumptions implicitly, given that you're not strategy consultants, but that you need the answers to that, how do you square that circle practically?
Well, maybe I can. It links nicely actually to kind of a related trap that I wanted to talk about, which might start off with what not to do, but then I'll get to what to do instead. But one trap that I see is focusing too much on diagnosis of the current state, right? And that might sound strange because, of course, diagnosis is important. It's important to know what is the problem. Everyone says you have to know the problem you're trying to solve. But the trap is to get stuck in analyzing what's wrong today at the expense of clarifying where you want to go, right? So starting with the future is actually a great way to move a bit faster towards where you want to go. And you'll uncover a lot about that. You'll uncover a lot about what are today's problems by looking at where you want to go. And a great way that I love to use for that is a gap analysis, because a gap analysis will kind of reveal what are the problems or what's missing, but in the context of where you are going. And another version of this trap is hiring consultants to do a big diagnosis and to interview all the senior leaders. Now, I have to say, as consultants, we kind of like this because we learn a lot and we probably earn a lot. And some clients like to get the nicely polished consultant report that we write about that. But does the client organization really learn something? Maybe not. The consultants learn a lot. We get really smart by doing that. So we really want to help clients diagnose for themselves and help them to see for themselves and get their own insights together about where they're going, which, Rupert, comes back to your question, which is how do we help? So, we have a way of facilitating those conversations and that discovery phase sometimes with big groups of people who perhaps have never talked about strategy before, and giving them the opportunity to stop and go, wait, where are we going? And which of these possible kind of priorities is the most important? Because you'll often get them going, oh, here's our strategy. Here's a list of 24 initiatives. We have to be really good at everything. And so just that process of stopping and going, wait a second, here's the 3 things we need to be really good at. And that's how we do that.
How do you get them to the 3, and actually how do you get them to the 1? Like, what are some of the tools you use to help do that?
Yeah.
So the main tool is the intervention in the room, and that is actually the conversation that you have. And so, I'm trying to think of an example. I think there's one example where actually the 24 initiatives coming down to 3 or 6 or whatever. I think that's we have a candid conversation with leaders about, you can only do so much. Your organization has only got the capacity to change and to do something different. It only has a finite capacity to do that. And in our experience, it's probably 3 or 4 things that you really need to be focused on. And those are the big ticket items, and they're usually capabilities. So either building on the capability you have today or building new capabilities. Going back to the example of this leader who produced this org structure and said, I need help to implement that. And when we start to interrogate the strategy, then we start to learn that actually it's going to be a longer process. We identified through that process 2 capabilities, organizational capabilities, that they needed to deliver that strategy that they hadn't thought about before. And that was a real eye opener for them. And it meant they were, if they had implemented the model they were going to implement, they would have got 50-60% of the way there, and not the full distance. So, is there a tool that supports that? Not really.
What mechanism? How do you tease it out?
Yeah,
It's facilitation. Yeah. And I also see that what the both of you are talking about is that how does this is all embedded in your design process. So you're bringing the engagement, you're bringing the clarity. You may not get into the strategy document itself, but you're getting the clarity around the strategy per se.
Yeah.
And so I now understand the three principles that you are trying to articulate before, that how it is connected with the work that you do with your clients, and that is the part of the discovery phase itself.
Yeah.
So, or sorry, the design phase, right? Like the
Yeah.
discovery is together; it's not in silos within the clients as well.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
as you do this, um, I I feel that a lot of these organization design has to be also evolving. So do you see that with your clients, that they now in this whole process, they have now built their muscle that they can do it themselves, or they now are forever dependent on you all to continue to build that muscles for them? So how do you see the organization itself evolving, and what
Mhm.
are some of the aha moments that you get from there?
I,
Um,
lo-
go on, Jodie.
I love that you I love that you asked that, Shradha, because it's a bit of a point of pride for us that our clients build their muscles as they go, that we, as much as possible, we're transferring that skill set to the client. Um, and sometimes there is that aha moment where you realize they're like, oh, we can do this by ourselves.
And
And
what are some of those skill sets, if you can highlight for us, that what is the organizational skill set that they need to develop as they need to do this work themselves?
yeah, so I might not articulate it very well, but Richard will. So let me see if I can articulate it badly, and then Richard can articulate it well. I, I think so. One of the things is, and because we're using a whole systems approach, when they get the idea that it's not just about structure, that they need to look at the whole organization, and they're like, oh, okay, this is what we need to look at, and this is what we should be talking about to move it forward. So we always share everything. We always say this is the framework we're using, and these are the steps you're going to go through. And then at some point you'll hear them pushing back on their colleagues saying, "Oh no, we can't jump already to the solution because we have to talk about the design criteria." And then you go, "Okay, now they're getting it."
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, Jodie, absolutely right. It's and what you've done there, Jodie, is actually mentioned a tool that we use, which is kind of escaping me for a moment. But the tool is the whole system model. It's the organization as a system model, which is a tool that we use. It resembles in any congruence model that you might see from, for example, Naylor Tushman or Burke Litwin or any of those, or the Galbraith star model. Very similar to that, but it talks about strategy in one end and performance out the other, and in the middle are all the elements of the organization that need to align to deliver that strategy and then to deliver the performance outcome that you're looking for. And that includes structure and process and skills and technology and governance and all of the things, all the elements that need to align. And when we show that to people, and we start talking in that language about the diagnosis, and in that language about the design process and the design criteria, then people it just opens their mind up to aha, right. So this should be a longer process. We do need more do need more data. We do need to make better informed decisions about what we do with our processes and how they align with the structure that we want to create. And is our enabling technology getting in the way, or is it actually helping us? And are we measuring things that are actually preventing us from delivering performance that we really want to achieve? Or should we, to what extent do we need to change our KPIs and all that sort of thing? And starts with strategy. Strategy is something you choose, and then you're able to make those design choices in the middle of the model, if you like. And it's the language. As Jodie says, it's the language that you hear the core team use. And we always work with a core team. We insist on it because that's how you transfer skills. So we will always have a team of 4 to 6 people working with us, part-time, sometimes full-time. That has happened, but part-time working with us, and we lead them through the process, and then that sort of expands out into tens and maybe hundreds of people engaged in the design process, in testing, scenario testing, and so on. So it's so I've just gone off. I've gone off into the middle of the kind of process.
Well, actually, I think it's relevant because you work for large organizations at a global scale. So global means people are in different physical locations, different time zones, etc. And you've also, talked at some length about spend more time on the design. Like a good carpenter measures twice and cuts once. So let's get it right, and test and iterate.
Yep.
So how are you doing that at a global scale?
Okay, yeah. So there's two questions in there. It's like, how do we do it and at a global scale? In some ways, it's hard for me to answer because I think working at a global scale is a bit like it's kind of second nature. So I wasn't sure if we're doing something in particular. One of my favorite tools in the whole process is prototyping, and more specifically, we use something that we call the prototype canvas, which is a way of moving a group of people into action mode. So once you've got a group that is clear on the future direction and they know what are the capabilities they need to build, and they've probably got a kind of bunch of ideas of things that might be the solutions. It's a way of taking one of those promising ideas and putting down on one page, what is the simplest and fastest way we can test out this idea in the context, and what will we do next, who needs to do what, and really importantly, how are we going to test, how are we going to revisit after 1 month or 3 months and know if it's working and figure out how to scale it up. And that is something that it gets people out of that kind of paralysis of trying to craft the perfect solution. So that's the tool and the method we use. How is it working globally? I think that we do a lot of work, virtually with teams that are dispersed around the world, using Miro or Mural, and we facilitate that process in this kind of format, like we're sitting. And then we would often have an opportunity to also work, in a face-to-face workshop, because global teams will from time to time come together and work together. And then, you have to make the most of those opportunities. So we might spend a day or 2 days working in person, and you'll get a different, as things work at a bit of a different pace. So you design it differently and you'll get that to happen. And then they'll go back out. Often we'll do something like we'll have a moment where we'll ask each leader in the room to share how they're going to then replicate this or multiply this in their own organization. And so you'll get that scaling effect as you go.
So I think we can definitely talk about this forever. And unfortunately, we are getting closer to our wrap-up time.
Okay.
We usually finish with tools and traps, but I think we have prepared that throughout our session around the tools and traps, which was fantastic. So we are not going away with one tool or one trap, but there's so many tools and traps to look out for. A thing that I'm curious about is that what is your usual pet peeve around org design? Like usually when you see that, this is happening in an organization, this is not the prime time to do org design. Like they need more time, they need to prepare themselves better, and then you can come and prepare. So have you had some kind of those experiences where you had said that this is not ripe enough for us to do this work?
Yeah.
And if there was a pet peeve around that or anything else, that's where I would like to go.
Yeah, the pet peeve for me is that the leaders who have the most ability to make decisions are not engaged, and they believe that they don't need to be engaged in the process. So that we're going to redesign the organization. That's nothing to do with me. I'm a customer, and it's when and I've had experience recently where this has worked the other way. We're actually working with the managing director of a business in Germany, working on a merger, and she has stepped into the role of leader of this process, not of customer of this process, and that's a hugely important step. But we have experience of senior stakeholders who are just not engaged, and that we have to disengage at that point, or we have to it doesn't work. Because they have to have their skin in the game, and they have to be leading it from the front. So that's a pet peeve. That's a pet peeve for me. Jodie?
Yeah. I guess sometimes I really wish that that our client organizations would think bigger, would grab the opportunity more. So, and connect, really connect the work with the outside impact for customers and for society, like connect with purpose. Because sometimes, and I understand why, because there's so much pressure, you're just focused on, well, how can we improve the results next quarter? But yes, that's really important and urgent. But, how can you use this to really, really grow the business and really have an impact?
I suppose that also comes from the fact that we do work on things like purpose and customer proposition as part of the work to understand the why are we doing this, and often when all of those things come together. So leaders leading we've got customer at the heart of the conversation. Purpose is an overriding principle. We're really getting into the accelerators that I talked about earlier. That's when it's like a sweet spot, right? You go, oh, if only every intervention that we ever did was like this. So
Richard, Joe, one of the things I found particularly interesting in your introductions was you both had quite long careers, in-house, doing really interesting org design work. And the work you enjoyed doing the most in-house actually was org design. But you both felt compelled to have to leave, the world of the corporate world so you could actually continue doing this work. And you also have spoken quite a bit about capability building and leaving that capability so people can do it themselves rather than relying on consultants. So I'm just curious as to how you're seeing organizations build this capability in-house. And I've written the book, OP&A, about building in-house capability. So I'd love to get your reflections on that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think I would see it as kind of cyclical, really. I mean, I certainly left an in-house role because consulting was exactly where org design was happening. But I suppose probably over the last 10 years, I mean, if I think about the work that I've got involved with building internal organization design or change teams or transformation capability, I think about our clients now over the last 3 or 4 years. And I can mention some names because they'll know who they are, but Novartis and Shell and Visa and other organizations who are actively building centers of expertise around org design. Jodie and I have a different view of this. I think that's stopping us working with them. Jodie thinks it's just creating more people who do org design work, and so that's good. So we kind of see it glass half full, glass half empty. But I certainly think it's a trend that we're seeing more now, and I think we've seen it over the last years. You're absolutely right. Much earlier than that, good HR people would go out into consulting to find org design type work. So yeah, I would agree with your original premise, but I think now we're seeing that trend go back up.
And I agree with Jodie, just to be on record.
Should we talk about the glass half full version?
Yes.
I don't think I agree that I had to go external to be able to do this kind of work. I think there's some incredibly good work happening internally in organizations. But I guess frustratingly, I feel like there's some barriers that we haven't managed to crack yet. And one of them might be often with it, especially within an HR function, there's a very particular skill set that HR people tend to be hired for and bring, which is a lot about building credible relationships and that kind of thing. And it's not if sometimes I think it's not the right skill set for this kind of work, that we don't have the people in there that we need. And secondly, I think there's also a structural issue around how we design where HR comes into where is HR connected to the strategy process when you've got a new strategy, and that somehow that connection is really hard to set up. I mean, I certainly, since I've stepped out, what I've learned is that there's a whole consulting skill set that I didn't have, and that, to be honest, I've learned most of it from working with Richard, who is an incredibly good consultant. So I'm learning that skill set. I didn't have some of those skills when I was internal. So I see some of the really good people working internally who are doing that, who have been external. So, you know, somehow there's something we can learn from each other for sure.
I actually love that. And I think this goes back to our first season, Rupert, where you and I spoke about that why org design is so difficult to be done in HR shop within organization. And you actually, both of you touched upon so well on it. There is a structural problem, and then there is a skill set problem,
Hmm.
right? And how do we bring that together in order to do a systemic thinking org design is challenging. And yes, there are organizations who understand that they're becoming too much complex, and unless they don't have it in house, they will never be able to solve it.
Right.
Which so they are heading towards that space, but they're also understanding that fundamentally that means that HR needs to be more connected with finance, operations, and strategy teams, and they will need to have consulting skills and not just relationship building skills.
I
So
agree. I
love
agree
that.
with that. And
Nice.
one of the things that I learned being a consultant for so long was that I learned about business. So I knew about HR, and then when I became a consultant, I started to learn about business. And so my understanding of the of how important it is to fit with strategy, and you know, and it allows you to work with, you know, the CMO, the CTO, the CIO, whatever it is, you know, in terms of functional design, because you understand the way that the business operates. And you know, HR folks don't tend to do that unless they're very, very good. Unless they're
And
very,
that
very
makes me so sad
good.
because I am in that space, and I'm like, that is the table stakes, that you
Definitely.
need to understand the business that you're enabling. The biggest part of that business is people, and you're enabling the people. How can you do that if you don't understand the business?
I don't
So
want to do a disservice
yeah,
to many HR people that I know who are very,
no,
very
I
good.
get it.
But there is a tendency for HR still to stay in the transactional and the tactical
Yeah.
rather than
I'm
the
with you. I'm
So
with you.
building. So if you take the premise that this capability, org design capability, is critical to have, and you can't just hire for it, you have to train for it. So when you bring on outside consultants like yourself, you know, going maybe slightly longer, taking longer, so you can build those muscles, as you've alluded, is a key part of the delivery and the deliverable. And baking that into the project is then, you know, a sensible thing, so that the trap is not doing that.
Yeah, yeah, agreed, fully agreed. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for coming today and talking with Rupert and me. We really enjoyed our conversation, and it's always nice to see how you are changing the world for good. So, thank you for doing the work, and I hope you continue to get big and big challenges.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you both too for letting us express our enthusiasm for the work and sharing the really good questions.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Thank you
guys.
And
both.
Rupert, thank you so much, as
Thank you,
always.
Shradha. Yep. Take care,
Always a
everyone.
pleasure. Take care. Bye now.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.